Exodus 20, verse 6. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven, above, or on the earth, beneath, or in the water, or under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and the fourth generations of those who hate me, showing loving kindness to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments.
This is the word of the Lord. Thank you, speak to God. All right. Hello? Check? Okay. Just a little side note. If you're joining us new today, we're in the middle of a series in the 10 Commandments, so not as a shameless plug, but highly encourage that you check out what we've spoken before, because it gives great context to what we're talking about. But jumping right in, the second commandment that reads, you shall not make for yourself an image of God or an idol, I think is one that we can classify as quite often misunderstood, and also it doesn't get a whole lot of attention, period, or just even in the 10 Commandments in general. We know the first one, which is, you shall have no other gods, and we know the third one, don't take your God's name in vain, and we know a lot of the other ones, but this one isn't one really that we talk about a whole lot. And I think it's because we really don't know what it means. But it's really important to understand what this one means, because especially when you couple it with the first one, that you shall have no other gods before me, that we were last week, it reveals another layer of our tendency for idolatry, where we put very, very good things in the place that only God is supposed to occupy, right? That we do this all the time, right? So here's what the two commandments in concert teach us, and I'll just go over them really quickly. The first one, as we went over last week, teaches us that we ruin our lives by worshiping the wrong gods. Okay? We worship false gods. And the second commandment tells us that we ruin our lives by worshiping the right God in a wrong way. These words should be on the screen, I think. Right? The first commandment tells us that we ruin our lives by worshiping, right, the wrong gods, and the second one tells us that we ruin our lives by worshiping the right God in a wrong way, which is to say that idolatry is not only worshiping false or non-gods, but also finding ways to worship the true God, Yahweh, improperly. Which means then that there is indeed a right or a proper or an appropriate way to worship, and of course also then that there's a wrong or an improper or inappropriate way to worship. We learned last week that the first commandment shows us that we are fundamentally people who worship, right? That's why every boy has always wanted to have superhero underpants, and of course all girls for a generation wants to be Anna or Elsa. We went over that last week. And the second commandment then tells us that we are fundamentally people who imagine. Which means that our great imaginations can often, and have often, led us astray from God. Because what ends up happening is that we find that we have a tendency to come up with a God made in our own imagination, to our own liking. Or worse, that we come up with a God that we made in my own or our own image. For example, you may have heard someone say, you know what, I can't believe in this God because of A, B, C, or D, right? Or whatever the reason is. And generally it's commonly understood like, I can't believe in a God that would punish people and send them to hell or something along those lines. But if you ever dug deeper into that conversation with that kind of person, what I end up finding with people like that, whenever I talk to them, is that most oftentimes, the God that they want, and therefore the God that they cannot get behind, is usually a reflection of that person's specific likes or dislikes, that person's pains or joys, that person's temperament or personality, or just that person's story. It's a God that reflects what they want. A God that reflects their hurts, a God that they cannot have because it means too much to them. Which is why most atheists aren't atheists because of their mind, they're atheists because of their heart. Because they can't imagine a God that will do or be something that they cannot quite fathom. That's why we then say they're a God of their own imagining, or a God of their dreams. It's also why so many world leaders throughout your history books have fancied themselves as gods, right, like Caesar and other people. Or why even sometimes very successful pastors often act God-like in the sense that they can't do any wrong, they can never be wrong, and you can never criticize them or anything because they'll always tell you, no, what do you know? You're not a pastor or whatever. And then of course we live in a world where there's scandals aplenty with people of this ilk, right? That's a God made in my own image. So So then God is a jealous God, as we looked at last week, not the K-drama type, right? The insecure, needy, overbearing, and often violent type of jealous. But the good kind, right? The zeal, the one who has a zeal and a passion to protect a love relationship and even avenge it when it's broken. We have brand new parents, Dan and Chris. I guarantee you they're jealous for their daughters. I promise. That God is a jealous God who wants to protect that which is precious to him and even avenge it when it is broken. Speaks then these two commandments so that we don't ruin our lives by worshiping the wrong God or even worshiping the right God in the wrong way. So 4 questions for today as we kind of break this down and kind of look into it. 1, what exactly is an image? 2, why are images such a big deal? 3, what differences does it make, right? Like why, what in the world's going on? And then 4, what in the world do we do then if we understand these things? Okay. So first, what exactly is an image? And we'll go through this quickly. Okay. The word images in the text in Hebrew literally means the word idol, and more specifically means something carved out of wood or stone. Wooden idols back in those days when this command was spoken was a big time deal, right? But throughout the Bible, then what it does is it starts to expand this image of, the idol, right? So it expands the understanding of an image to include things of like made out of molten iron, images of God drawn or painted on canvas, right? And in the end, if you read through scripture, an image is something that they do that we even make up in our own mind. Not yet, too fast, okay? We're not there yet, right? So basically something that you even make up in our own mind. Anything, an image, an idol, something that we imagine, right? Okay, so that's basically what an image is. And the second question then, why is this such a big deal? Because if you're looking at it, you're like, that doesn't seem like a big deal. Why are we spending a whole Sunday talking about this thing? And Moses gives us the answer in Deuteronomy, and the words will be on the screen for you, okay? He says in Deuteronomy 4, verses 10 through 12, it's a bit of a paraphrase. He says, remember, the day you stood before Yahweh at Horeb, you came near and stood before the mountain, and the mountain burned with fire to the very heart of the heavens. Darkness, cloud, and thick gloom. Then Yahweh spoke to you from the midst of the fire. You heard the sound of words, but you saw no form, only a voice. That's key. Okay? And then he keeps going, right? In verses 15 to 19, and he says this. Then Moses says, so watch yourselves carefully, since you did not see any form, lest you act corruptly and make a graven image for yourself in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any animal that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the sky, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in the water below the earth. And beware, lest you lift up your eyes to heaven and see the sun and the moon and the stars and all the hosts of heaven, and be drawn away and worship them and serve them, those which Yahweh your God has allotted to all the peoples under the whole heaven. 2 things within all of this. God is making crystal clear, number 1, that we are people who make images, representations of things in our minds. It's why every sports legend wants a statue out in front of their, thing. Everybody. You've made it big if you get a statue outside your stadium, because that's the thing you want everyone to understand, right? But the second thing that God makes clear is that God has chosen his word as the mode, the way that God is going to reveal himself to his people. Like it or not, God has always chosen to do things through his word. John 1 says, in the beginning was the word, and the word was God, and was with God, so on and so forth. And then, of course, in creation that God speaks all things into being through what? His word, right? He says, let there be. But let's dig a little deeper, because we're going to get to the meat of this in a second, right? Notice, the second commandment, along with the long passage we just read in Deuteronomy, makes many references to, things of the earth, right? Like, don't make yourself an idol in the heavens above, or in the earth beneath, or even the water underneath, right? The whole idea is this. He's saying, don't make any images in any form, period, no matter where they're from. Just don't. Which again, probably to you sounds unimportant and like, why am I listening to this? Why are you spending time? But here's why. And this is huge. Simply put, what God is trying to tell us at the front of this is that only God can be God, and nothing other than God is God. Now, most of you in the crowd are probably thinking it, but you're too nice to say it. You're probably like, whoa, good one, Pete. Like, whoa, blew our minds off that one, right? Like, no. Probably like, of course, only God is God. Like, that's a dumb thing to say. I mean, what else is that supposed to mean? But here's what it means, and stay with me here. Everything centers on the fact that God is holy. Who knows what holy means? Anyone? Set apart. John, you're going to stop answering these questions because you're a Bible nerd, right? Holy means set apart, other than. But what does that mean, though? Right? What does that actually mean? It means that God is other than, unique, pure. That means there's God, and then there's everything else. Right? There's only God. He's a one of a kind, all unto himself. So if you put it together, then what it's saying is that not even creation is God. Creation, you and I, and all of it is a work of God, but not God. And again, before you dismiss it, understand that creation even is not even an extension of God, which other religions believe. Because we believe, and we're told that God holds all of creation moment by moment, which means literally if God were to let go of creation, all would go into smoke, literally. Which means then that nothing can serve as an image of God. Nothing in creation can represent God. Nothing in creation can stand in God's place and reveal God as God really is. Now, again, just stay with me here because we're going to get to the point. If you read Scripture carefully then, you'll realize that creation is only said to reflect God's glory, but not to reflect God. And again, this is important because it means that creation isn't godly enough. It's not God-like enough. There's not enough of God in us for us to represent God as he is. Nothing in heaven, no stars, no moon, no sun, which is what the Persians believed, represents or can reflect a God. Nothing in the sea, no fish, no sea monsters, anything like it, which is what the Babylonians believed. Nothing on earth, no animal, no bird, nothing, which is what the Egyptians believed, can actually reflect God. Now, the nerdy ones in here, like John, will probably say, what about us? We were made. We're the image of God, aren't we? Are we? You probably guessed from my question that the answer is no. Because we were made in God's image and according to God's likeness. Which means to be created in his image means that we are not his image. To be created according to his likeness means that we are not his likeness. We are image bearers at best, which is a very critical distinction that we cannot and must not forget. We reflect God's glory, but we are not the glory of God. We reflect or manifest something of his nature and his character better than anything else in creation, which is really cool, but we are not the nature of God. Again, God is God and we are not, which is to say we are not godly enough or enough like God. There's not enough God-likeness in us for us to represent who he is. It'd be like me trying to parade around, trying to be Michael Jordan of some kind. I don't look like him. I sure don't play like him. But even his sons, who have his own DNA, aren't good enough to be Michael Jordan, sadly. I pray for LeBron's kids because they're going to disappoint a lot of people in the world because everyone thinks they're going to be LeBron James. There's only one LeBron James. He's the once in a generation person. Even Beyonce's kids, whoever, these people. But think of it like God. I think, I'm going to go a little bit off, but I need to make this point clear. Because I think we have this idea in the church that we're like something cool, that we're like something great. But we need to remember that God, in who he is so God, and we are so not, that the chasm is like greater than anything you can imagine. And he's saying, don't you forget it. Even the greatest artist in the world created the coolest thing, but guess what? It ain't even getting close to even sniffing God's atmosphere, if you want to put it in those terms. Nothing in creation is God, and therefore nothing in creation can serve as an image of God. And there's scriptures that help, like in 1 Kings 19, but I think this quote that you'll see on the screen will help it best. It says this: "We shall be on the right track if, with Israel's religious environment in mind, we understand that the second commandment as the expression of an utterly different view of the world." Listen, okay? This quote should be on the screen. So what is basically saying? This second commandment is giving you a different view of the world, okay? Now, in the greater and lesser religions of the ancient East, the gods were personified powers of heaven or earth or the abyss. But this was not the way in which Yahweh was related to the world, okay? However powerful his sway in it was. However powerful God's sway in our world was, theologically, God transcends this world. Nature was not a mode of Yahweh's being. He stood over and against it, as is creator. If you read the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, it's really crazy, it's long. You'll find literally 20 chapters on how to build a tabernacle. You'll find, like, in the book of Leviticus, I read it in Korean, which is crazy, but I recognize it's that theme. We're reading through the book of Leviticus in Korean. And my senior pastor sitting there asking us, like, hey, do you know why there's all these different offerings? Did you know there's like a blood offering, there's a smoke offering, there's a whatever offering, there's like all these things. And the rules for these offerings, just go read it sometimes if you want to. It's literally like you have to take a ram that's like 3 years old, but like this little thing, no defect at this time, it's gotta be from this. Like, the rules are insane. And when you read it, the first thing you think of is like, God, you're ridiculous. Why would you make everyone go through all this ridiculousness just to present an offering to you? And what God is saying is, because I'm God. Because I'm holy. And I don't think you get how holy I am and how holy not you are. You should realize that to even make an offering for your sin, that I allow it, is grace that you cannot imagine, because without it you should die and perish, because I am God. That's why when Moses says, I want to see you, and God says, you can't see me, you can only see literally my backside. You know why? Because if you saw the glory of God, you go, poof. It's showing the distinction between who we are and who God is. Now, having said all that, the next question is, what difference does this make, right? Like, what impact does this make? And here's the main point of today, okay? Every image, no matter how good it is, puts God in a box, and we cannot. Because, I mean, let's be honest. You hate it when someone puts you in a box. Imagine if we put God in a box. It's not even possible, but even if it were, imagine how God would feel if we tried to put God in this tiny little box, which you do all the time. God has to be this, we say. God has to be that, we say. God can't be this, we say. God can't be that, we say. And I think God looked at me like, how dare you? What do you mean? You can't even figure out what you like half the time. I mean, what are you supposed to tell me? How are you supposed to tell me who I am? And this image, like putting God in a box, it happens in these 4 ways. The first is that any image puts God in a box by limiting him, right? Notice that every image in the world is inadequate. We have a bunch of photographers in here, right? That no matter how good your image, no matter how good your camera is, no matter how you're shooting an 8K raw footage or whatever, it cannot capture the fullness of any real thing. You can watch a James Harden 1 foot step away, Harden three-pointer for the win on YouTube as many times as you want, but it'll never feel the same if you were on the court with him, standing right next to him. Period. You can watch any and every BTS video and analyze everything within it, but you will never ever know what it's like to be on the stage with them unless you were there. You can't feel the adrenaline, you can't know the smells, you can't feel the feels, you can't do any of those things. No matter how good your stereo is, no matter if you got a 4K, 5K, 8K TV, it does not matter. It will not compare. I hope you agree. Because an image only captures a part of the thing that is imaging. That's why it's called an image. Which means that if you and I are using an image of God as God, it completely distorts my worship of God. Because you're only understanding this little limited picture of God. Which means if you use that one image, it blocks the rest of God off from what I can do. Let me give you a couple examples, and I apologize to the younger ones. So these examples, I tried to think of different ones, but it just didn't work. I had to go here. But for instance, a bull, and everyone knows this, right? The golden calf. A bull, back in those days, it stood for strength and durability, which God is. God is strong and he's durable. You can't ever defeat him. It's all good. But if you worship God in this image, you would then miss that God is the lamb, or that God is the fire. Even in Revelation, God is this horse, and he's this like person that's got like fire and like swords coming out of his mouth, and then he's a bloody lamb murderer. He's both. You can't just use one and think that's good. Or you can't just think that God is a God on the throne, and he's always on the throne indeed, but God is also a God who's on his knees and he prays. Okay? Then the second way that we do this, every image then leads us astray. And again, another unfortunate example, but let me use this. Going back to the bull, okay? If you know, Israel built a golden calf, right? And people forget that they did it in some way to honor God's power, right? For rescuing them. Because they needed an image to understand God, because God was so other than, okay? But culturally, back in those days, and again, I apologize for the younger ones here, bulls were known for their sexual prowess. Okay? And if Israel had kept the statue long enough and worshipped it long enough, then I guarantee that Israel would have thought of God as the powerful and durable God, but also the sexually powerful God, and into it. And if you connect the dots at some point, sooner or later, Israelite worship of God would have included sex at some point or another. If you think I'm crazy, go read your history books. Because the Greeks, in Greek mythology, gods were very much like men and women. They were all pictured as a man or a woman. And at first, the reason is because it centers around how men and women are relational, personal people. We like to relate to one another. So they wanted to know and understand that God wasn't like this far-off thing. They wanted him to be personally relational, right? But over time, these gods in the Greek mythologies took on other elements, including and particularly sexual desire, which means many years into the Greek mythologies, if you read their history books, their worship, literally, I kid you not, in their temple worship, they would have prostitutes on the outside, and men would come in to worship, and they would have sex in the temple as a form of their worship, because that's where it went. You use an image long enough, and it will lead you astray. And the third, every image localizes God, and your generation knows this better than anyone. Every Snapchat or every Instagram picture has a location where it was taken to document the time and the place. Which means that if you use an image of God and this image with the location, then you will think that only worship can only happen in that particular place. It's why there are many people who think that worship can only happen in churches, wrong. With certain pastors preaching, again, wrong. With certain types of worship songs, again, wrong. It's because you've attached it to a thing. You've attached it to a place. Because we're using images rather than God himself. And the fourth one, the most important, images puts God in a box, because then it becomes a substitute for God. And this is the most important one. I referenced it earlier, but why do you think that pastors become so powerful in our world? Because they become a substitute for God. I've always said, and I hold this to this, and that's why I asked you. As I've always asked you, that if you have anything that you didn't like about what I preached, then I expect and I hope that in love for me, you would tell me. Email, text, direct, it doesn't really matter. Because I always say that the moment a pastor or a leader of any organization, but particularly the church, can no longer be criticized, then you enter a danger zone. That's why I remind all of you that I'm a sinner just like you, that I'm not perfect just like you're not perfect. And that's why the first beatitude and the first mark of a gospelized person that God says is what? You are poor in spirit. It's the exact opposite of infallible and perfect. And if you look at verse 5 and 6 that Patrick read for us this morning, we realize that images, right, that take the substitute of God will then get passed on to the next generation. Let me speak to the Korean church real quick, because most of us in here are Korean or Asian. If you have a father who imaged being a good Christian or God as someone who's never satisfied with anything less than perfection, then guess what you think God is going to want from you? Perfection. Which is if you miss one thing or don't do one thing, or if you do one bad thing, then guess what? You suck and you're not deserving anymore. Or if you have a mother, right, who thinks that God only loves us and therefore portrayed that to us, right, when we have our entire lives kind of put together, we have our plan and we know everything we're going to be and all that kind of stuff, then guess what you think? You're going to say, well, I'm not ready to do this, and I'm not ready to go on missions, I'm not ready to lead, I'm not ready to serve, or anything. Why? Because I don't have my life put together. My life is a mess. We pass these images on to our next generation. It's what we do. We become substitutes for God. If you really think about it, most of what you think or you know about God, either you got from someone like me or from your parents. Which means if someone like me or your parents exercise too much authority and give you an image, that's what you think God is. Not what you get out of here, but what you get out of the mouth of the people that you listen to. It's why I always say, if I'm not preaching the word exactly, and that's why I get really nerdy with this stuff, because I want to prove to you that I'm actually preaching the word and not what I think. It's important. Lest that I don't make for you an image that you worship of God. No matter how good your pastor is, no matter how good your favorite pastor on this planet is, he's not God, and he or she is not perfect. And he or she cannot and shall not be an image of God, because we cannot image God. So let's kind of wrap this up and finish, but before we finish, a clarification. For all the artists in here, God is not saying that we cannot use art in worship. If not, then we have to get rid of all music. God is not an anti-artistic God. Let's make that clear. And if you don't know why, if you think, saying, why are you saying this, Pastor Pete? It feels like you're just, quote unquote, putting the arts down. No, I'm not saying that. You know this because of the tabernacle. If you have the time, go read. Okay, in Exodus chapter 25 to 40. Did you know God spends 15 chapters in Exodus in nauseating detail about how they're supposed to build a tabernacle? It's insane. Try reading through it without falling asleep, especially if you're not an interior designer type. To me, it makes my head spin because it's like you have to do this by cubic feet by cubic feet. You got to put this here, put this here. It's crazy. Okay? And the tabernacle, once you read it, you realize, man, it's got color, it's got symbol, it's got texture. Our worship space, for me, is too bland because it doesn't resemble the tabernacle because there's not enough art in here. There's not enough things in here that represent the beauty of God. We also celebrate the Lord's Supper, which is using bread and wine as symbols. By the way, any good symbol is good in and of themselves, but the symbols must point beyond themselves towards God. If they point to themselves and it's bad, it's an image, you should get rid of it. Right? It's why for us, it shouldn't matter that bread is bread or what kind of bread you use, whether you use Hawaiian or sourdough or white or French, whatever, it doesn't matter whether you drink wine or grape juice. I heard somewhere, this is crazy, I heard somewhere that a church only uses certain types of grape juice, like Welch's, and that's it. Anything else is not good enough. Not important. It's also why we know that art is important, but also proves our point today, that if you study the tabernacle, I told you the tabernacle is built like an onion, right? It's like layers. Outside and inside is the Holy of Holies. If you were able to walk through the temple, like in kind of oh my goodness, the museum, right? And you walk, the outside, the outer courts, art everywhere, like fancy colors, texture, all that kind of stuff. The closer you got towards the center, it became more and more bare, and then when you got to the Holy of Holies, if you were allowed to enter in, which most of us wouldn't be because we're not the high priest, guess what? It's empty. Completely empty, lest you think that anything in the room could represent who God is. So, all of this, I know, lots of information today, I apologize. Can't really avoid it. What do we do? I can't worship an image, I can't have an imagination to feel like you're saying, Pastor, like, what in the world do we do? We just stay here like statues? No. Here's where things get really cool, in my opinion. You see, because God created us as people who imagine with great imaginations and creativity and all these things, and because He's not telling us that we shouldn't utilize these creativity, right? And because God knows, because He created us, that we need visuals, right? That we need things. Many of you are visual learners, audible learners in many ways. Many people are tactile learners, right? The reason we need these things. And because God knows that we have a tendency to make pictures and images and representations, because we do it all the time. Most of you can't sit and listen to a lecture without doodling all over your paper. It's who we are. But because God knows this, but also knows that we cannot make an image that's good enough of God, right? Because we are not God-like enough. God gives us an image of Himself that's perfect. Colossians 1:15 says, and He is the image of the invisible God. Hebrews 1:3 says, and He is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of God's nature. And everyone knows who that He is. His name is Jesus. God knows this about us. And so He goes, you know what? I know this about you, so I'm going to give you an image. Not someone made in my image, my image. The invisible, hidden, unimaginable God. He has made the perfect image, the perfect likeness, and His name is Jesus of Nazareth. And He, in every way, does not fall into the trap that we outlined earlier. Okay, I'm going to go through these really quickly. Because Jesus, you'll see it on the screen, is the only image which does not limit God's glory. John 1:14 says, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld His glory, glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth. He is God. Jesus Christ is the only image that does not lead us astray from God. John 12:45 says, what we see in Jesus is completely true. They who behold me, behold the one who sent me. Jesus is the only image of God, but we do actually meet Him. John 14:9 says, the one who has seen me has seen the Father. And Jesus Christ is the one image of God that really is God. Philippians says, have this attitude in yourself, which was also in Christ Jesus, who although He existed in the form of God, exactly like God, he says, did not regard His equality something something to be grasped. But here's where it takes the cake. Because everyone says, I want to know who God is. I want to know what he's like. I want to be able to understand him. He's so far, and he's all in this place. He's out in the universe. He's bigger, and no one else understands. No, but that's not true. Because we have in Jesus the human form, fully God and fully human in every way, for us to know exactly who he is and what he's like. Which means then the second commandment isn't negative, then it becomes a promise, as we said. It's no longer, you shall not make for yourself any image. You replace it with, behold, my son. He is I am he. That's why my favorite song says, the one thing that I ask, this I shall seek, to dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And then what? My favorite verse, I think, to gaze upon his beauty. To gaze upon the Jesus who is God in your midst. Everything you see about Jesus is God in every single way. So if you're apologetically the prostitute type, and that's the kind of life you're in, guess what Jesus will do? He'll eat with you. If you're the sick leper type, who nobody will get anywhere near because you know you're diseased and you might give it off, guess what Jesus will do? He will touch you and save you. If you're the shunned woman at the well who nobody will look at, guess what Jesus will do? He'll ask you for a drink of water so he can give you life. And if you're the dark, terrible, crappy, judgmental Pharisee type who don't know who he is and will murder for him, guess what he'll do? He'll say, take me, murder me for your own, and Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Do you know another God like this? And would you dare worship any image that's not quite that? So then, 3 practical implications, tips, if you will, to finish, and I'll invite the praise team in a little bit. You can come up when we get to the third one. First, simple. Be mindful that it's just as easy. John, you didn't listen to me. That's the third point. What's it up? Be mindful that it's easy to put Jesus, John, in a box. See, you're not listening to me. Listen to my words. Be mindful that it's easy to put Jesus, God's image, in a box as well. Everyone thinks Jesus is a nice guy. He's not. He's savage. I don't know if you just read your Bible. You think he's not. Whew. Trust me. But he's also the most tender, loving person you've ever met. What? Side note. Have you ever noticed when people talk to Jesus, did you notice he always asks questions, like stupid, dumbfounding questions? He's basically trying to say, like, 1, you don't know nothing, but 2, you got to think a little deeper. And he doesn't actually do everything the way that you want him to. Again, the fact that Jesus eats with sinners and tax collectors, again, it's like me waiting outside of, if I'll apologize for reference, Waffle House outside of a strip club or something, and then me eating with all of those folks all the time. So Jesus does. Who else does that? Nobody, just him. Right? Jesus is the only one who's literally God on earth and chooses to come through a little Virgin Mary on the north side, which is the south side, which is to say the poor hillbilly side, with no dad, really, no status, a carpenter's son who's got nothing, who speaks like a southern. I'm telling you, if Jesus was modern day Jesus in America, he would be a southern person with a draw. Promise. I don't know if you know this. Sorry with the silence today. Whenever Jesus and his crew rolled up to anywhere, people would be like, "Oh, you from Galilee, ain't you? AKA, you a hillbilly." Why? Because he's like you. So don't put him in a box either. Study him, understand him, get to know him for all that he is. Jesus is also the one who did not take the fact that the Pharisees and the scribes were taking the temple courts, right? The whole scene that everyone loves, right? Everyone know why he did that? Because he realized that they were taking the court that was meant for Gentiles, people who need to know God. And they made it a place where they were selling and trading, and they made it a thing, and he just pissed off and he said no. Even the whole, the cursing of the fig tree, if you know this, I was reminded of it over the weekend, but if you read in scripture, he curses, he sees the temple, and you're like, the temple is a farce. Like on the outside it looks cool, but on the inside it's not doing exactly what it's meant to be. It's supposed to be a house of prayer for all the ethne people, but they've made it into a den of robbers. And he walks down and he gets to a fig tree, and the fig tree is supposed to be in leaf, which means they're supposed to have these little tiny first fruits. They're called nodes. I forget what the term is, but he don't have it, so he realizes you're a dead, rotting, hollow tree. Die. Because you ain't gonna live anyway. So just die already. Did you know Jesus abolishes the temple? Right? He's not everything you think he is. He is he upon us, so don't put him in an image. Number 2, 10 practical tip. Obey this commandment, and our vision of God and therefore life will expand. Did you know our world, our vision of the world is as big as your vision of God is? If you think God can't do things, then you won't believe that he can do things and you won't trust. Pretty simple. But God is both the God who knows the number of hairs on our head, but who's big enough that he can hold the entire stars in his palm. The more that our little images of God are smashed under the weight of his glory, particularly Jesus, the more bigger, I know that's not a word, that God becomes. And when God becomes big enough to hold your world and your life together, then you will trust him with everything you have because you realize who he is. Again, we use this imagery all the time. I'm thankful that I'm 6'2", and I'm huge compared to my kids. My kids think, right or wrong, that I can do anything because I'm so big to them. And if God is that big to you, you will trust him with everything. No question asked. But if God is this small to you, then you know what happens. And then the third, now Tracy, you can come in. If you obey this commandment, then your life will change. Did you know that you always become that which you worship? You always become that which you idolize. Which is why I said last week, if you yourself are your own God, then you just become the worst version of yourself. That's why 2 Corinthians says this, but we all, with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory, just as from the Lord and the Spirit. Before we respond, I want to just give you and lead you into some of these questions we talked about last week. I'm going to ask you tough questions, but here they come. Ask yourself, what are your images of God? When you think of God, what do you think of? Do you think of him as like this exacting, like, he's the one who counts all your tallies on the wrong, and he's just waiting until you come to him so he can tell you did this and this wrong? Is that your image of God? Is your image of God that's like this nice person who never tells you to do anything, who never disciplines? By the way, parents in the room, if you can't discipline your kids because you think that God doesn't discipline you, wrong. What is your image of God? Remember in the Chronicles of Narnia, right, when the kids are asking about who the Aslan is, and they're like, is he a tame lion? And then I forget who, but Eva, and he's like, tame? What you mean he's a lion, bro? He'll eat you. He's a good king. That's why the fear of the Lord is giving me wisdom. Because it's freaking God, and I'm so freaking not. What are your images? And how do they fall victim to the 4 pitfalls that we described in today's sermon? Ask yourself that. Don't go home and not ask yourself these questions, because you're not doing anyone else a disfavor but yourself. You're not doing me any disfavors or any favors, just you. Your images of God, how do they fall? How do they limit God? How do they localize God? How do they substitute God? How do they lead you astray? Take those things and get rid of them. Smash the little images in your mind. How are you worshiping the true God in the wrong way? What are your images? For some of you, your parents are God to you. Wrong. Your parents are probably great. I hope they are, but they're not God. Sorry. Great for you. This is honest. If you think I'm God, you need to break that, because I'm not God. Trust me. Or if you think that your academics, or your future, or your house, or your future spouse, or whatever is your God. Breakthrough. Because again, the whole point of the Ten Commandments is that God is trying to protect and to enhance the life of freedom that He's won for us. Which means if you don't obey this, you're going to live a life of slavery. It's just the way it is. You shall have no other God before me. Only I, your Yahweh God, am good enough for you. And you shall not make any images of me, no matter where you find it, no matter how good they are, because nothing is as good as me. People of God, I hope you hear this day. Though you are so not God in every way, that you are valuable to Him beyond your own imagination. Would you then worship, crushing your little gods before Him, and giving your adoration and glory to the only one that's worthy of it, the only one that's good enough to satisfy. So take time as we allow the worship team to lead us to smash your little idols and give true worship to God. And whenever you're ready, before even John asks you to stand, whenever you're ready, I invite you to stand in song. But take your time to pray